Alright, so El Dante lost its axle a couple days ago, and quite an interesting little deal. I heard a clunk in the back end. I thought, alright, the locker's locking up on me. Well, 2 weeks later, I heard a bigger clunk and a bunch of grinding and clinking and pinging and popping, and anybody who's had a locker go out knows exactly the noise I'm talking about. Problem is, El Dante has a C-clip 10-bolt rear end with a posi, the old gov lock in it. And when you munch up the locker, it allows the C-clips to fall out of the spider gears, and then your axle shafts start walking out. So yeah, on the side of the road, here we go. Everything's falling out of El Dante. So, I don't like C-clip axles to begin with. So, El Dante is getting a 14-bolt. So, called up a local source I had around the area. He had an old 14-bolt with 373 ratio sitting up in the woods. It was quite a bear to load on a wet, cold, rainy day by myself with old Green here. Luckily, you know, old Green's bed tilts down, so I was able to climb it up on there and winch it in. Threw my back out for a few days after that one. These things are a pig. They don't call them a pig for nothing. They're heavy. But the old venerable 14-bolt, we went through it. Everything looks pretty good on the inside. The reason it was in the scrapyard is it had a munched up wheel bearing on one side. So got in, looked at the hub looks okay. So went through, put all new bearings all the way through it, and looked at the ring gear, backlash and everything was pretty good. Put a new pinion seal in. So pretty much spent this past week refurbishing this axle, and we're going to slide it in El Dante here pretty soon. I'm still down in Carolina, still living in a friend's basement, and a good friend of mine, Eric Sundell with Sundell Auto Specialties, is going to help me slide this one in probably tomorrow or the next day. So a few things about 14. This one here is a 70s version. Now the 1970s version, there's a couple little different things about it. Number one, it's got bolt-in e-brake cables. There's actually a little clip. It's like a two-piece deal that bolts in. To try to get that to made up to Dante's parking brake cables on Dante are of a 91. So they are the 80s style, which has the old clip that just basically slides in and snaps into your backing plate. These older style backing plates have got a big old hole cut in them, like I said, 2 bolt holes, and that whole bracket snaps in and bolts in place. I would have had to go source a set of backing plates to try to get some that would made up with old Dante there. But in order to do so, I looked at it and I said, it ain't worth me trying to track down a whole nother axle just for 2 backing plates. So I'm trying an experiment. I took apart that bracket and I ordered the cables up for the 3/4 ton version of old Dante there, and I cut the little clip off the end that snaps into the backing plate, at which point in time it allowed me to take the bolt-in bracket and clamp around the end of the cable. So 14 bolt, for those of you that have never been around them, 14 bolts on the diff cover. They were made by GM. They've been used pretty much underneath 3/4 and 1 ton and 1.5 ton stuff from 1973 till about 2005. Now in 2000 they came out with a little bit different version. You can see those. They've got some ribs running on the top of the actual cast differential unit. I'm not going to get into all the different versions, but here's a couple things to keep in mind. Old Green here has a 14 bolt underneath it. I have hauled 4 tons of rock in the bed of this truck, and that old axle never has given me the least little bit of trouble. Every few 1,000 miles I go in and tighten the backlash up in it. You can get online, you can find all kind of videos about how to set your gear lashes up in a 14 bolt. They're super easy. You can set one up in your driveway. Trick here is start off with U-bolts. For this 3/4 ton axle going into a 1/2 ton truck, the axle tube itself is much wider than the 10 bolt that was in there. These 14s, the axle tube itself runs 3 inches and 3/8, so 3 3/8 inches in diameter. So the inside of your U on your U-bolts can have to be 3 3/8. Now height-wise is up to you. Half ton spring pack is only 3.5 inches tall, and then your back of your spring plate is only about 1/4. So for me, I'm needing something in about the 10-12 inch range. That way I know I got plenty up there to suck it down and cut them off. So for me, 3 3/8, shaft size is 5/8, and about 12 inches tall. Now the 1/2 ton and the 3/4 ton spring plates are different. This is a 1/2 ton version that I got out of a Suburban before I left Wyoming. The holes are in a different location. They're wider apart on the 3/4 ton than they are on the 1/2 ton. This is one out of a 1/2 ton or a 3/4 ton here. The holes are 5/8 instead of the 7/16, 9/16, and like I said, the holes are spread much farther apart to compensate for that bigger axle tube. Hub seals. The seals and the actual hubs on these things, they run. It's a national. Hub seals a national 2081. That'll get you your actual hub seals to go on the inside up against your backing plates. The outer wheel bearing, the race bearing combo, is a national Alpha 38, so A38. The inner race and inner bearing, the inner bearing is a national 387 Alpha Sierra, so 387 AS, and then your inner race is a 382 Alpha, so 382A. Brake shoes, part number is pretty simple. They've been using the same drums for a long time. So 451 is your part number for drums, or you can look it up by size, which technically if you pull them off and you measure them, it's going to be like 12. But they call it a 13 by 2.57. So they're actually about 2.5 inches across the face, and they're about 12 and something from end to end. They call it a 13 by 2.57. Wheel cylinders, if you're going back to drums, wheel cylinders are a Whiskey Charlie, WC 79767. One more time, Whiskey Charlie 79767. And then last but not least, your pinion seal. Now, these things have a removable pinion, so you can undo the 6 bolts on the front of the pinion, and you can actually pop that whole pinion nose out and do it on the table with a crush sleeve and all if you wanted to. Pinion seals of Chicago Rawhide are CR21955. CR21955. And your lug nut studs, your wheel studs, the thread pitch on them is a 9/16 diameter by 18 thread. And the lug nut itself is a Dorman. Dorman part number is a 611052. It's 611052. Now there's 2 different versions of the spindle nut. So when you take this whole hub assembly and you slide it back on there, these are a full floating rear axle, so the bearing rides on the spindle and the axle shaft passes through. So there is no weight on the actual axle shaft itself. There's 2 different versions of the spindle nut out there. The early version out of the 70s looked like this. They had 2 really thin nuts. In between that was a spider ring that clamped around it. It's a good thing I took a look at this, because the one underneath old green here is an 85. And this guy here is out of the 70s. So by seeing these 2 little nuts in there, I said, okay, something's up. Because underneath old green, there's one big nut, there's a square key, and then there's a retainer clip that goes around. Turns out in the 80s, they had some problems with these things backing off. And sure enough, when I got into it and got to looking at my nuts, one of them was actually cracked in 2 places. So I said, that's it, I'm going after the new style nut. Found it too. So here's the juicy on that one. The spindle nut is a Dorman 615132. Now, my local auto parts store got them in a 2-pack for about the same price as you'd be buying one. So 2-pack's better than paying twice for one. 615132 is the nut itself. Now the keyway, which is a little bitty square woodruff key, is also Dorman number 615140. They also come in 2-packs. And the retainer clip, which looks like a little wire clip that goes around it, is a 615141. 615141 for the retainer clip. So technically you need 2 of them, but check with your local auto parts store. Chances are they can get them in 2-packs a lot cheaper than they can buying them individually. One nut was like 38 bucks. Well, I ended up paying like 24 for 2 by combining it all together. The hubs are the same no matter which way you go. The single rear wheel hubs will bolt onto a cabin chassis like old green, and they'll also bolt onto a dually axle. The axle itself, from ear to ear, is pretty much the same. The difference is in the backing plates and the hubs themselves. Single rear wheel like this one, the protrusion from the wheel mating surface where your wheel studs are out to the outer of the axle shaft is 2¼ inches. But like if we crawled underneath old green right here and we looked at it, the hub itself is backspaced in a whole nother inch to bring those dual wheels in. And so it's actually between the wheel mating surface and the outer axle shaft flange is 3¼ inches. So there's a rundown on the 14. Hate to say it because I just put brand new wheels and tires on El Dante. They're 6-lug, 16-inch Pro Comps, steel powder coated wheels, and 6-lug. And now we're going to 8-lug. But I don't do anything halfway. So we're going to have the beefiest rear ends underneath that thing that I can get. And then maybe I'll find enough stuff to swap the front end out to 8-lug here someday soon too. Alright, I got to go up and see Eric. Let's get this thing swapped in. Well, the U-bolts are 9/16. I couldn't find any 5/8 ones without special ordering, and one machine shop said they wanted like $175 to make these. I mean, seriously, it's 9/16 rod or 5/8 rod, 3 3/8 on the inside, and then you need them to be about 10 inches long. As you can see, 10 inches does real well. So I found them at O'Reilly's. The problem here is that's probably the puniest U-bolt nut I've ever seen. So turns out they're 9/16 by 18, which is the same size as my existing lug nuts on this 14 bolt. So I think I can be down about 4 lug nuts or 8 lug nuts spread out between, because I've got about 4 of these old ones here. So what we're going to end up doing, turning these guys around and threading them down on there, and that gives me a whole lot more surface contact area on for holding and grip. Like I said, I've never seen a U-bolt with this small of a nut. That really seriously disturbs me, especially compared to my old ones, which were massive. So this is gonna, with using the lug nuts, and they're already made to be torqued anyways, that's gonna get me a whole lot more grip and a whole lot better seal. I'm gonna feel a lot more comfortable with it versus trying to go find a 9/16 by 18 fine thread at this point in the game. So my brake lines were crushed. Inline Tube is a company that makes these reproduction brake lines, and they're really actually very, very good. I can't bend this up and put the armor tubing around it for what inline brake can make them and sell them to me for. And I got to go get a conversion joint for the drive shaft, but it looks like the drive shaft's going to actually fit without having to shorten or cut it. And I re-welded my shock mounts in here from the truck axle to the Suburban. I think I got my shock mount in the wrong spot, except for the fact that Suburbans run in the 80s and 90s. They run one to the rear and one to the front. And so by ordering the lines for the truck, I think I got this in the wrong spot. That's alright, a little minor tweaking. We'll get it worked out. Well, back at it again today. Didn't quite finish up last night. What we got left to do this morning, bleed the brakes out, as we put in the inline tube fitted brake lines yesterday. The right one fit really well. The left one, I had to do some tweaking and bending on it to get it in there. Biggest thing is I had to go make a run to the parts house last night and pick up a conversion U-joint. Conversion, or sometimes known as a bastard joint. This is the 447. Is the U-joint that's going to take us between, I think it's the 1310 series to 1350 series. You look at a little diagram here. We've got the Suburban U-joint over here. It's got internal locks on it. Basically 3 9/16, 3 5/8 total overall with an 1 1/8 cap. And then the yoke over here with like an 1 3/8 cap, or real somewhere they're close to. And then total is 3 5/8 all the way across. So basically 3 5/8. The yoke is a nice cross, but we're going between the internal locks and the external locks. So let's get back at it this morning and we'll get her finished up today. Well, after a little bit of fighting with it, got that joint in. These joints have the 91 Suburban has internal clips, and the old 14 bolt has external, which is what these little tabs are up here in the yoke itself. I had to do a little bit of polishing and grinding on the edge because I think over the time these ears have imploded on the inside and it didn't really want to fit, but it was close enough to where it wasn't enough to go find another U-joint. From the factory, these things came, and what they did is they just, there's a slot and a ring around the actual cap here, and they would inject like a fiberglass plastic in there. It helps to take a torch and sort of heat up the ear a little bit through here, and a lot of times that plastic will start running out these holes on either side. I really dislike the internal clip style because what they'll do when you replace one of these that has the plastic or the fiberglass in it, they're going to send you something that has like an internal hairpin clip and it slides in the internal. Chances are you've taken a press to put this in or a vise and your ears have bent in, and it's near impossible to get those clips back in, especially if somebody's been into it before you are. This one was a factory, so this one had never been changed out, so it didn't give me as much trouble as I thought it would, but it still did not want to play fair. The aftermarket straps for these things are less than desirable. They typically don't fit quite right, but the ones for my half-ton over there ain't gonna fit. So I have to use what's specific for this yoke. That being said, I'd really like to change this out to a flange drive, but I want to get the 241C transfer case converted to a slip yoke eliminator before I have a custom drive shaft cut. Right now the top priority is get this thing up and rolling and get it rolling reliably so we can get on with life. And like I said, we're still looking for a house. One of our biggest problems is we need something with a shop building so that I can continue doing what I do, whether it be machinery, which that's a teaser for an upcoming video. Bought a skid steer a while back, and that thing, I would like to cry every time I look at it. I paid $11,000 for it. It was a dead machine, and supposedly it just needed a computer, but no. I got into it, and it's been a complete and total overhaul of the hydraulic system from square one. So I'm about $8,000 upside down in that machine. Alright, so here's the old nut system that I was talking about earlier. We're fixing to set the bearing preload on these things. Here's your clip. It's just a little wire metal clip. Set that somewhere it ain't going to get terribly dirty. Some of these little Matco or Snap-on screwdrivers are pretty handy. They got a magnet in the back side of them, so you can grab this little Woodruff key and pull it out. Now the original Woodruff keys were only as long as the nut was. These aftermarket ones are longer than the width of the nut, so you may have to grind a little off, otherwise it's going to protrude out here and make it hard to get your clip on. The nut itself, you can use a punch. You can line up these extra holes through here, and you can use a punch to get it where you want it and tap and get it tightened down. On the side of the road, that's great, but this is a new set of bearings. We're going to use the proper tool for the proper job. This little rascal right here is a special socket. It's got the 6 tabs on it for mating up into the 6 holes here. Plus, it also has a centering device. So the round slot centers up in here and hits where it needs to go. So it locks in place, plus it self-centers itself, no chance of falling off. This little rascal, I ended up having to get it from a friend off the Mack truck, so you're looking at probably pretty near $100. Actually, it's made by OTC, and the part number is 1929. So OTC 1929. Grab it off Amazon if you're going to contribute to the Jeff Bezos and ultimately the Communist Party. That's up to you. But it is made in the USA. It is 3/4 drive, so you probably want to grab yourself a 3/4 to 1/2 inch adapter, because we're only going to go to 50 pounds. Now, a book that I could find on this is that it goes to 50 pounds. So first off, I'm going to back it off because I've already got these kind of tightened up and over tightened to get them in place. And there wasn't a whole lot of pressure there at all. So what I thought was tight wasn't tight. So new set of bearings, it says 50 pounds. I've already got my Snap-on torque wrench set to 55. 50, and then back off. There's 50. Just back off to 35. The lowest this one will go down to is 40. So we'll run it to 40. There's 40. As you can see, it still spins pretty freely. If you have one that's tight on you, spin it while you're tightening. And that's pretty much what needs to happen. Now, for the pin and the Woodruff key, it says bump it up to the next line. Slots are all lined up there. Tuck it in. There's a little tab on it that goes down to hold that Woodruff key in place. And basically, yeah, you're gonna make a liar out of me. It pretty much clips in on one of the couple of threads through there and hold her in place. Simple as that. Get a couple of bolts started to get that gasket held where it needs to be. Some people use RTV sealing on this, some people don't. Since I'm missing a bolt and cannot seem to find it, I'm having to use a grade 8 with a lock washer on it. 1/2 by 13 is your thread pitch. Well, as much as I hate to admit it, I'm actually putting a set of Ford rims on here for a couple of days until the new wheels arrive. I was running Pro Comp number 51s from Four Wheel Parts, a 16 by 7 or 16 by 8, kind of like an old D-style mag wheel, which looked really good on this old Burb. I'm a real big proponent of steel wheels. I don't like aluminum. Most of the time, people that put aluminum wheels on, they use the original lug nuts for a little while because they're too cheap to go find the actual ones that need to be on aluminum wheel. The steel lug nut up against a steel wheel mates up into the concave hole, but on aluminum it starts chewing out the aluminum. Aluminum lug nuts typically have kind of like a pass-through tunnel and a big washer, so you'll find them on most lug-centric vehicles, not hub-centric. Chevrolets, on the other hand, are hub-centric, not lug-centric. This extra rib right here is where your rim is supposed to mate up to the hub so that no weight is on your actual studs. Fords, on the other hand, typically ran a heavier, beefier lug stud and a heavier, beefier lug nut, and we're designed around being lug-centric. So, either way, it's okay for a couple of days from running steel on steel, but as soon as I can, I'm going to get my BFGs swapped over to the new wheels, which Four Wheel Parts said they should have them here in a couple of days. And I guess this thing's going to be a mutant 8 lug in the rear, 6 in the front, until I can get the parts to convert the 10 bolt over to 8 lug. So as soon as that materializes, I'll bring you guys along for the conversion. Whenever you're using an oversized rim like this, you need to make sure it centers up. So you run 2 of them down. Make sure the acorn mates up nice and solidly in the hole. There it went. Because if they don't true up in the hole for the lug, then you can ride whoppity. Wonder where that out of balance, or you wonder why your lug nuts walk off real quick like. Alright, there it finally went, triple. Now, let's pull it off the jacks, take it for a test run.